US Chess Championship started in St. Louis, featuring all the best American grandmasters, including Fabiano Caruana, Wesley So, Levon Aronian, and the one and only Hans Niemann in the open section, and the likes of Alice Lee, Jennifer Yee, Irina Krush in the women's section. Take a look at rounds 5 and 6. Hans Niemann is playing against young talent Abhimanyu Mishra and starts the game with e4. e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, castle, knight f6. We have Jacopiana opening, very standard, played by every level of chess players. We have a castle, we have knight d2, knight goes through squares f1 to possibly g3, possibly f5, or maybe c4. It's a normal route of the white knight in this position. Bishop goes back to b6, bishop b3, some maneuvering starts here, knight e7, possibly going to g6 for Mishra, and knight c4, attacking the bishop on b6. It's not under attack per se, because it's protected by the pawns, but still, you want to get that bishop out of the game as soon as possible. Knight g6, rook e1, rook e8, bishop c2, c6 preparing, move d5 to control the center of the board for black. Now Niemann exchanges the pieces on b6, a takes b6, and Mishra has double pawns b7, b6, but he also has an open file for his rook. d4 immediately striking in the center for Niemann, b5, h3, always a good prophylactical move, not allowing black pieces to get to a square g4. Also, there is a luft for a white king on a square h2, h6, same for Mishra, a3, very standard prophylactical moves. Bishop develops to d7, white bishop develops to e3, queen c7, rooks are connected, knight starts moving around the board with knight d2, possibly preparing the move f4 in the future, but immediately Mishra plays d5, attacking white center. We have an exchange pawns on e5, and bishop gets to a very nice square on d4. Black queen has to move from attack on f4, g3 again. Black queen has to move, and exchange of the bishop on f6. Queen takes f6, f4. Niemann starts attacking on the king side of the board, and here Mishra quite unexpectedly plays knight takes f4, sacrificing a knight for 2 pawn. Pawn takes knight, queen takes pawn, queen e2, exchange of the pawns on e4, and bishop takes h3. And we have a position where white has an extra knight, but it comes for 3 connected black pawns that look pretty dangerous if they start moving forward. And also white's king is totally vulnerable and open on a square g1 with no pawns protecting him whatsoever. What computer thinks about this position? Computer thinks this position is pretty even. Queen f2, exchange of the queens, and we have an endgame again, knight against 3 pawns. Very interesting endgame, rook d8, knight d6, very nice tactical maneuver. Now, black cannot take the knight on d6 because rook takes e8, checkmate. Exchange of the rooks on e1 and b6. Again, rook takes d6 was not possible because rook e8 is a checkmate. Bishop f5. Bishop have to be exchanged now. Black bishop doesn't have any moves except for exchanging. But here comes king f8, which is again also tactical maneuver. Niemann takes the bishop, Mishra takes the knight. And now we have bishop against 3 pawns. And let's see if either of opponents would be able to convert this into a win. Although computer against shows that this position is a draw. Rook e4, g6, rook b4, king goes to the middle of the board, that it should be in the endgames and in endgames and f5. Black pawns start moving, and it looks pretty dangerous. c4, rook d4. Rook goes to b3 and rook f4 check, king e1, rook e4 check, bishop e2, b takes c, and rook takes b6. So we have three pawns for black for the bishop, but now those pawns are doubled. And I think in all those exchanges, white achieved at least something. And something is those double pawns. And also pawn A is now a passing pawn with no black pawns on its way. Mishra plays king d6, king d2, and pawns move forward. g5. Look dangerous. If those pawns like avalanche go forward, how are you gonna stop them? Rook b8, g4. Rook h8, attacking the pawn on h6, and here, actually, interestingly enough, computer suggests that you should give up the pawn on h6 and activate the king and place it in the middle of the board with king e5. Instead, Mishra plays a more logical move to a human being, rook e6, protecting the pawn on h6 to protect and keep those three pawns alive. He gives up the pawn on c4. Bishop takes c4, bishop g6, and rook g6, king e3, f4. f4 sacrificing the pawn on e4, but now it turns out that if Niemann takes on f4 with the king, after g3, pawn on g cannot be stopped. The only way to stop it is to sacrifice the bishop from f1 and then take it on g2, and then it would be a simple draw, rook and two pawns against rook and two pawns. Niemann plays to win, and he makes pretty much a bad move, king f2, but again, he wants to keep the bishop on the board, and he wants to keep playing this position for a win. g3 check, king g1, and king goes to the middle of the board, king e5. Another check, king d4, bishop e2, very good position bishop right now. It protects all the white squares, so black cannot move pawn h, cannot move pawn f, and therefore they move pawn c, c5. a4. Here was an important moment of the game. The correct move for black was rook b6. Rook b6 attacking the pawn on b2. Mishra didn't find this idea and played c4. And that was a pretty critical mistake. Rook d8 check, king d3, king e3, and he gave up the pawn on c4. And now white have two connected pawns, passing pawns a and b, and actually that would determine the outcome of this game. f3. Now this looks very dangerous, but rook d3 check, king e4, and a5. g2, and that was pretty much critical mistake of the game. g2 was the wrong move, not easy to understand exactly why. The next move for white, the only winning move for white, and Niemann finds it, is rook d1. And the idea is to put the rook behind the pawn, and passing pawn a cannot be stopped. King e3, rook e1 check, king f4, and bishop d5. Wonderfully positioned bishop on d5. Black plays rook g5, trying to attack the bishop and throw it away from that square, but here comes a brilliant move, brilliant sacrifice by Niemann. Bishop takes f3, and after bishop takes f3, you would think that we have rook and two pawns against rook and two pawns should be a draw, but this position is winning for white, and Niemann obviously had to know this before he sacrificed the bishop. And it's winning for white for a simple reason that their pawns are going forward faster. Rook a1. So here was the idea to put the rook on the first rank, to put it on a1, and now pawn a just goes forward. King goes back on e4, and Mishra is trying to get his king to the last rank to protect from the pawns marching, but it turned out not to be the plan that would draw this game, although there was no other plan either. b4, king d5, b5, king c5, b6. Pawns are just running forward. King c6, check, another check, king a8, a6, and now black's king is trapped. Not only is trapped, but also rook c8 is the checkmate threat, so therefore black rook has to go back to g8 to protect from this checkmate. Rook h7, h5. NIEMANN just takes the pawn on h5, rook b8, rook h6, simply protecting the pawn on b6, rook g8, rook h7, king b8, and simply rook h2, and white takes another pawn on g2 and simply wins the game. Again, rook g6 would be the move that would solve all black's problem, but unfortunately for black, on that move there is rook ah with the checkmate. So the king, black king's just going back and forth. Rook takes g2, rook b8, and again rook b6 protecting the pawn on b6, and then white king simply marches forward. I'll go quickly here, marches forward, gets to a square c6, and here comes rook g5, rook h8, king b5, more maneuvers, and here comes rook c8, sacrificing the rook for NIEMANN. Wonderful ending of the game. Rook c8 check. You have to take this rook. b7 check with the fork. King b8. And now king b6. What a move. And now wherever the rook goes, and it's under attack, I remind you, there is a checkmate. Mishra, to his credit, allowed NIEMANN to checkmate him, because he actually could play rook c6 check and give up the rook, but there would be a checkmate. But now he allowed rook c7, a7. Look at this checkmate. What a wonderful checkmate with a pawn. Beautiful endgame by Hans NIEMANN. He is one of the leaders now with Wesley So and Fabiano Caruana. And we're going to round 6, and two favorites of the tournament are playing against each other. And this game you don't want to miss, because I'm not sure that you ever saw something like what happened in that game. But let's start with the first moves. Knight f3, d5. Caruana is playing white. Wesley So is playing black. c4, e6, g3. Knight f6. Bishop develops on g2. d4. Pawn moves forward. Castle. Knight c6, d3. Bishop develops to c5. Knight to d2. Castle for black. Attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back. h3, a5. I'm going quick in the opening because not much is happening here, but a lot would be happening in the middle part of the game. e3, attacking the center of the board for Caruana. e5, protecting that. Exchange of the pawns on d4, and we have a4 blocking the pawn on a5 from moving forward, but allowing black pieces settle on a very nice square on b4, and the bishop immediately goes there. Fabiano offers an exchange of the bishops, but Wesley So just develops a light square, bishop to f5, and attacks the pawn on d3. Queen c2 protecting it, rook e8. Rooks belong on open files, and that's what Wesley So does. Fabiano Caruana puts his rook immediately to counter black rook. Queen d6, g4. Caruana starts activity on the king side of the board. Bishop has to go back, and we have c5 attacking the queen. Queen goes back to f8. White's position looks better, but still it's pretty even. Exchange of the rooks on e8. Bishop goes to f4, and it turns out not so easy to defend the pawn on c7. Black plays a passive move, rook c8, simply protecting that pawn. Rook c1, that move is made to protect the pawn on c5. So now the pawn on d4 is under attack by two knights. So it has to be protected, but Wesley So starts counter-attacking on the king side of the board with the move h5. We have g5, moving forward, attacking the knight, and knight goes to d5, attacking the bishop. Bishop has to go back to g3, and we have b6. b6, challenging white's pawn on c5, and we have a beautiful sacrifice of the pawn from Fabiano, g6. It's not good to take the pawn on g6 because after queen c4, this is a deadly pin, and the knight probably will not survive the onslaught it's gonna get from the queen, from the bishop, and again, it's pinned. So doesn't take the pawn. He plays knight e7, exchange of the pawns on f7. Knight jumps to a square g5, very active move, queen g6 and h4. Here, white's position is becoming better by the move, king h8, exchange of the pawns on b6, and queen c4, simply attacking the pawn on d4 with the knight and the queen. Queen f6, defending that, and now Caruana starts penetrating into black's position with the queen. Queen b5 first. That's kind of looking at the pawn on h5. If queen would take on h5, that would be the end of black. So they play queen f5, blocking the queen, and now queen a6. Queen is going deep into black's position. Rook f8. Now you could take the pawn on b6, there is nothing wrong with it, but Caruana found a little better move, queen b7, attacking the knight on c6. There are simply three attackers on that knight. Wesley So decides that instead of going back with, let's say, knight d8, it's better to sacrifice that knight and create some counterplay. So bishop e8, bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, rook takes c6, and here, if knight takes c6, queen takes c6, then we have simply a position where white has a material advantage. They have two knights for a rook. That's advantage white, and black do not have much of a counterplay. And So didn't want to go into that position, and he played here queen takes d3. So he basically sacrificed a full piece for some activity. But this position is already +4 for white, according to the computer. Rook e6, knight f5, looks kind of active with the threats to take on g3. But we have bishop e5, absolutely wonderful move. Bishop goes to a central square e5. Let's not forget that the knight on b3 is under attack. So Fabiano sacrificed the knight, and So took it. Queen takes b3, rook h6 check. Using the pawn on g7 is pinned, so rook h6, you cannot take that rook. King g8 is the only move, and rook h7, attacking the pawn on g7 with the checkmate. Here, computer shows that Fabiano is +7. I'll repeat that, +7, which is pretty much winning on any level, but on Grandmaster level, it's like a resignable position. Wesley So continues to do something to defend with rook f7. He gives up the rook, but at least not checkmate. Knight takes f7, king takes h7. So that was just the exchange of the rooks. King knight g5 check, king goes to h6, and here the easiest way to win was to take the pawn on b6, and Caruana does that. His position is like +5, still very good. g6 and king and queen f6, and this was a mistake. The idea is correct. The idea is correct to checkmate on h8, but it had to be done through squares d8 or b8, and the reason being because after queen f6, black has a move queen g8, which protects everything, protects all the important squares here. And white really do not have much. Knight f7 check, king h7, knight g5 check. Caruana has only 1 minute left on the clock, so he repeated the move so to get quicker to move 41. King h6, and bishop takes d4, which was another mistake by Caruana. And position that was +7 for white just several moves ago. Now it's absolutely even exchange of the pieces. And here we have extra pawn for white, but black have everything defended, and to win this position it's almost impossible. Queen g7 offering the queen exchange. If white takes the queen and the queens are exchanged, that's a definite draw. Caruana, who obviously understood that he was winning this game and now it's probably not winning anymore, he probably got upset and decided still to play for a win. So he doesn't exchange the queens, he plays queen e4, he allows Wesley So to take the pawn on b2. Now white do not even have an extra pawn, so obviously that's a definite draw. And I'll quickly go with the rest of the moves. There were not so many of them. And in this position, which here, queen h3 check, the position was repeated 3 times, and both players agreed to a draw. Absolutely amazing game, where one of the best players in the world, Fabiano Caruana, had an absolutely winning position, and the lesson here is don't resign, play till the end, and miracles can happen, and it did happen. Last game I want to show you today happened also in round 6, and played in the women's section between one of the favorites and 8-time American champion Irina Krush, and also another favorite of the tournament, Carissa Yip, who didn't start the tournament really well, but she won her last game against the leader of the tournament in round 5, and is quickly getting to the leaderboard. And this game was absolutely amazing and absolutely very important, of course. Irina Krush started with c4, English opening, g6, d4, bishop g7, e4, d6, and after those couple of moves, we have King's Indian defense, one of the oldest openings in the world, very standard opening, bishop e2, castle, knight f3, e5. That's, again, very standard. You really don't want to take this pawn on e5, because let's say after exchanging of the queens and knight takes e5, seemingly white have an extra pawn, but black have a move knight takes e4 here, getting back the pawn, because after knight takes e4, bishop takes e5, and we have pretty much an absolutely even position, and even a little better for black. This is all known in theory, so obviously white do not take the pawn on e5 and move the pawn forward to d5, closing the position. Again, it's all standard, a5, h3, not allowing black pieces to get to a square g4. Knight goes to a6 to develop through c5, bishop g5, queen moves away from the pin, knight d2, knight d7. Those knight moves pretty much tell us that both players want to play active, possibly f4 for white, f5 for black. g4 for Irina, she doesn't allow the move f5. Knight goes to c5, very nice square for the knight, by the way. Rook g1, king h8, knight goes to f1. Not sure what the plan was exactly here, because if the knight goes to g3, let's say, there are no moves to him further. So therefore, not sure what that move was all about. And immediately Carissa uses that move, knight f1, with f5 attacking the center, and pretty much saying to Irina, your king is in the middle of the board, let me just start opening files. Queen d2, knight b4, bishop e3, and knight takes e4. Black has an extra pawn. Knight g3, here knight already have something to do. It should take it with the next move, the pawn on e4, and have a pretty decent position here. But knight d3 is a good move. Check. So Carissa gives up the pawn, but she gives up the pawn on in a different circumstances, so to say. Queen takes d3. We have equal material, but the problem for white, the king is in the middle of the board, and immediately e4, sacrificing the pawn. Very nice move, very textbook move for black. The king is in the middle of the board, so why not open files? e4, knight takes e4, queen e5. Queen goes to a very nice square on e5, attacking the pawn on b2. And Irina has to protect it with the passive move, a rook b1. And black's position is just getting better every move. Bishop d7, king e2. Irina thought the king is safe here, but it's not the case. Rook e8. Another piece is moving to attack. f3. f3 allowed black to check from h2. Queen h2 check, and possibly Irina calculated bishop f2 as one of the continuations, which would have been okay if there wasn't a move rook takes e4, sacrificing the rook. And that would have been the end of the game, because cannot take with the pawn, because on f2 we have the queen and the rook attacking that bishop. And queen e4 doesn't work because rook e8 wins white's queen on a pin. So we have that sacrifice that didn't happen in the game, but after queen h2 check, now white have to play knight f2, and obviously this pin is absolutely deadly. Bishop h6, immediately attacking the pinned bishop, check from king g8, and g5, seemingly everything is under control for white. But we have bishop g7 attacking the queen. Queen goes to h4 and bishop f5. Both bishops are slicing and dicing white's position. Pretty much nothing white can do. Rook d1, because the rook on b1 was under attack. We have queen e5 attacking the bishop on e3. Pretty much the only move to protect that is knight e4, blocking this file. We have exchange on e4, and queen takes b2 check. Queen takes b2 check. Besides the fact that black's position is totally winning, Irina also have 1 minute left on the clock, and her opponent has 32 minutes. So obviously this game didn't go Irina's way. Rook d2, queen c3, e5, some desperate attempt to sacrifice a pawn and activate some pieces, but simply queen takes e5, rook g3, because you have to protect this bishop. And now the last move of the game, absolutely beautiful, a rook f4. Again, using the pin. Cannot take the rook with the bishop because the king would be under attack. Queen takes f4 doesn't work either because, again, the pin, losing a queen. And what's worse, or, you know, the biggest problem, the queen is under attack and it has no moves. No moves. Let's say rook g4, probably the only move to protect the queen, but then queen takes e3, and there would be a checkmate in 3 moves. Rook f1. Here you can give up a queen and checkmate. Oh, sorry. Rook still one more move, and queen c3 checkmate. So beautiful win by Carissa Yip. A lot of great games in this US Championship. Leaderboard. In the men's section, we have Wesley So, we have Fabiano Caruana, we have Hans Niemann. They're all in top 3. In the women's section, we have pretty much everyone still in contention. We have like 8 people within a point. Alice Lee is currently leading, but again, everybody is very close. So those were great games. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and we'll be here for more rounds, and hopefully, actually no, I'm sure they will be as interesting as the previous 6. Thank you for watching.